Have you ever, during a LARP, thought, what would my character do? I see wavy hands. If that's the case, you have made a meta-reflection. When we LARP, we simultaneously navigate multiple planes. We navigate our fiction, where our characters, the world they inhabit, everything that is related to the diegesis of the story exists. We also navigate reality, ourselves, our real-life bodies, culture, language, etc. But these two planes, they overlap. They interact with each other. That's why we feel bleed, right? And it also happens when we ask ourselves, what would our characters do? Or when we revisit our character sheets to get guidance during a LARP or recall information. Or if we use a meta technique. And all of this is called meta-reflections. They are reflections about the LARP rather than within the LARP, this space where fiction and reality intersects. But all of this doesn't happen everywhere. It happens inside of us, in our own little universe. Because each individual has their own impression and an understanding of the world. It's based on our experiences, our perception. It's our own little reality. And our universe affects the way that we understand both the fiction and our reality. When we LARP, we rarely do it alone. We often do it with other people. And that means that our little universe meets a lot of other universes. And together they make up a multiverse. And between all of these different universes of a group's collective multiverse, there can be a coordinated understanding, either as something the group has agreed to together, or something that has been defined by the group, a sort of consensus. That also means that these two models can be combined. Because when we're LARPing, we share a fiction and a reality which are individually perceived and understood. And we can meta-reflect on this, both individually and collectively. And these meta-reflections on a group level happens every time that we calibrate with our co-players. Every single time we use a technique like slow escalation, where we, with our actions, try to communicate to our co-player what we are trying to do while we are actually noticing their off-game reaction to what we're doing to figure out, is this something they want to do? It also happens every single time that we try to reach and re-establish some sort of consensus on our collective multiverse with our co-players. So, why is this important? It's important because meta-reflections, they function as a creative engine. They enable narrative development, they encourage creative exploration, both individually but also within groups. And by facilitating meta-reflections, designers, they can enhance player agency and ability to co-create. They can support calibration of expectations, of wishes for play, boundaries, and thereby reducing potential miscommunication. And they can also strengthen the building of consensus, trust, and collaboration amongst participants. So, this sounds great, right? How do we do it? How do we facilitate meta-reflections? There are, in general, two ways. There's the direct way and the indirect way. The direct method for facilitating meta-reflections is by using explicit instructions. Tell your players that they should meta-reflect. Use structured prompts and different reflection exercises. There's also an indirect method, which is using sensory and aesthetic tools, such as music, auditory cues, visual artifacts, physical interactions. And I have examples of both of them. An example of a direct method was used for the workshops at the Larp Eclipse by Chaos League in 2025, where the players were instructed to co-create their character relations within a group of co-players based on a fiction premise and a series of discussion prompts. And doing this, the players simultaneously discussed and developed the shared fiction and their relationship, so everything related to the fiction, the diegesis of the story. But they also got introduced to the players that they shared these relationships with off-game. And on top of that, they reflected on their own boundaries and wishes for play together. Thereby, they activated all three planes of this shared multiverse, and it was directly facilitated and prompted. So, the indirect example is from the Larp Panopticon made by me, ran in 2025. And during the workshops, all of the players, they were met with a series of visual artifacts, auditory cues, music, touch, and also narrative prompts to spark meta-reflections. And what is specific about these are that they are all related to or part of the diegesis of the story. But the players were told to choose them off-game and reflect on them off-game. And in that way, it was a more subconscious process of meta-reflections. But they were also told to discuss these things in groups. So this individual process alternated with group discussions and establishing of consensus. And this created both some shared meta-reflections as players negotiated how their desires for play and the fiction aligned. And they also established a shared multiverse and group consensus, a narrative, while they continuously moved between fiction and reality in the process. And this way, the meta-reflections, they became both an individual and a collective act that fueled creativity, collaboration, and calibration. So, if you are to take anything away from this talk, it is that if you, as a designer, want to facilitate meta-reflections, you should try to find and use the overlaps between fiction and reality, or make the players continuously shift between the two, and thereby you can prompt them to meta-reflect. And if you utilize the dynamic between individual reflections and group consensus, continuously letting players alternate between the two, you can create a framework where the meta-reflections not only relate to the individual's universe, but to the shared multiverse. And thereby, you're not just facilitating meta-reflections, you're also creating group consensus. Thank you.